Welcome to the She Hit Refresh podcast, a podcast for women age 30 and over who want to transform their lives by moving abroad. I'm Seppi, rhymes with Peppy, and I'm your host. Now, today I'm so excited because we have a guest and we're diving into a topic with her that is of interest to so many of you, and that is how to convince your employer to let you take your job abroad. Who is it out there? Anyone out there like, that is me? Well, today I'm joined by Nicole, a fellow 44-year-old who made the leap from California to Portugal in 2022, sight unseen. She made a case to her employer to work remotely, and they said yes. So she packed up her life, including her husband, 2 cats, and a dog, and hasn't looked back. It has been 3 years now, and she's building a community, learning the language, and sharing her immigrant journey with over 30,000 followers on Instagram at Nicole in Portugal. So let's get into it. Welcome, Nicole.
Hi. So nice to be here.
Yeah, so excited to have you on and share about your journey of moving to Portugal, but also this part about something that you were able to do with your employer that so many people are curious about how to do. But let's just start with, where are you in Portugal today?
I'm in Porto today. I participated in a female founder discussion on listening this morning. And so I'm actually doing a little co-working today.
Love that. Oh my gosh. And Porto is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. You're so fortunate to live there. We'll get into your story of why Portugal and why Porto. But let's take it back to before you moved, actually. I'd love to give some context to what your life looked like before you made your move abroad.
I was born and raised in California. I've lived my entire life in California, originally in Northern California in the Silicon Valley area. And then before I moved, I lived in Los Angeles for 13 years. And so California has always been the place where I've worked in lots of different industries, but sort of recently worked in digital marketing. And I have some degrees in anthropology and documentary filmmaking. So always working in building communities, sustaining communities, and understanding, in the marketing aspect, who are you talking to and how do you reach that customer and how do you continue to engage them in, your offerings.
Fabulous. And so in California, were you working a typical 9 to 5, going to the office? What did your work life look like?
Typical 9 to 5, going into the office, having big meetings and things like that with people. That was sort of the day to day. I'd wake up in the morning and you'd go to the gym and then you'd go to work all day and then go grocery shopping and then have dinner with friends after. And that life just seemed so far behind.
How did you start thinking about moving abroad? When did that appear on your radar and why?
So this was all during COVID. I think, COVID gave so much of us time to pause and really think about what we wanted for our lives and what our lives could look like post-COVID. I worked all through COVID in my, digital marketing position at the same company. I work in e-commerce, so we were selling product. And that was actually a really big year for us when everybody was at home, spending time together. This was the time when my husband and I really sort of thought about, what is the life that we want? And we had always wanted to move abroad. This wasn't necessarily a new concept. It was just more difficult of how are we going to get there? And that is the time when we started doing the research of, well, if we wanted to leave the United States, what would be the next step for us? And where would we want to move?
Fabulous. Oh, that's so great that you have a partner that, was on board, had the same dream. And why do you think you both knew that you wanted to move abroad at some point?
I think we're both big travelers. And like I had mentioned, I have a background in anthropology. And so I really love experiencing new places, people. And I think that was just always something that I saw for my life. At some point, I worked at a museum in Los Angeles and thought, maybe I'd move to Japan. And that's sort of where my family heritage is from. That never worked out. But, if someone had said, oh, well, in a couple of years, you'll end up in Portugal, I think I would have been pleasantly surprised. Not exactly sure how I would have gotten there, but happy nonetheless.
Right. So let's talk about that. How did you end up there? So you said during COVID maybe that's when it was a catalyst to doing the research. And what places came up on your short list, or was Portugal kind of the only one?
So I said to my husband, okay, we each are doing our own independent research because this is something that we're going to do together. I will present to you my number one choice and you present to me yours. And that is how we'll sort of choose. So it's sort of we each had our own assignment to take away and do our own research. I really started looking at places that have the type of life that I was looking for, that were safe, that had, good healthcare, that were affordable. And Portugal just sort of kept coming up on internet searches as also it being pretty easy to move there, meaning, a lot of places want you to have a job already in the country. And Portugal was not one of those countries that required that. The place that my husband came up with was Canada. And I think that is something that Americans throw around very easily. Like, oh, I'm, fed up with it here. I'll just move to Canada. Well, come to find out, Canada is actually pretty difficult to move to. And he participated in like a Facebook group, informational session, and really learned that they have strict criteria. You have like a point ranking system based off education, based off work history. And they're really looking for the gaps that they can't fill with their own Canadian citizens. And so not by default, but, Portugal ended up sort of checking all the boxes of the things that we were looking for.
Great. Ooh, I love it. So there's a few things there that you said that I want to just talk a little bit more about, especially so our audience can understand that better of what you said about your husband finding, choosing Canada, but then doing the research and finding out that really it's not that easy to just pick up and move, which is the case, I think, in most countries around the world, especially when we're talking about, you were mentioning the work aspect. People think, I have skills. I have a great resume here in the US. I should be able to just apply in the UK, Canada, somewhere where they speak English, and they'll hire me, right? No, because countries protect their own local labor, just like any country does. The US does this too. And so always local labor is always going to have the first dibs on jobs. And then, like you said, wherever there are gaps, and usually this is with highly skilled roles. So let's talk about tech. A lot of like C-level or management sometimes falls into that, science and research, but every country is different depending on the labor shortages that they have for certain roles. Those are the jobs where there are special kind of work visas for those roles. And that's where they can hire foreigners, but that is still super, uber, very, very competitive. So it is very difficult to get a work visa abroad. I just want to stress that to our audience who maybe wasn't familiar with that. So you guys had looked at places that, what were your other options? And Portugal was great because Portugal had an option for you that wasn't the digital nomad visa, because that wasn't even a thing, right? When you decided to move?
Yeah, that's right. That's a sort of, I think, past year or so. And we moved now 3 years. We've been in Portugal. So we came over on the D7. The digital nomad is the D8 now. The D7 is the passive income visa. It still includes like pension, social security, maybe you own real estate somewhere. And so that you get like a monthly rental income coming in from that. Other investments would also qualify as passive income. But at the time, they were still counting income coming in from abroad, even if it was work income, into that passive income bucket.
So visas are always shifting and changing. So that's great that you mentioned that there were some qualifications or there were some ways to qualify for the non-lucrative visa in Portugal. But, once the digital nomad visa in Portugal was launched, no longer can you qualify for the non-lucrative visa with active income. You have to look at the digital nomad visa. That would be for someone who wants to work remotely and live in Portugal. But another thing I wanted to touch on, sorry, that you mentioned earlier was about your husband in Canada and jumping into these Facebook groups. Yes, I just wanted to remind people, Facebook groups are such a great resource to start learning about the countries you want to move to, the cities you want to move to, and also connecting with people who have done the thing you want to do. And a lot of those communities are going to be the expat group. So for instance, expats in Berlin or Americans in Paris, those kind of Facebook groups, or She Hit Refresh. We have our own Facebook group, are great places to start getting information on your move. So you guys have decided on the same country. You're thinking about that's the place you want to move to. But I know from my experience and, all the women that I've worked with, that even though you want to do something, doesn't mean that there aren't any fears or limiting beliefs around that. So what were some of you and your husband's biggest fears about moving abroad?
I think the biggest fear is that we weren't going to be able to visit the country before we decided to move. It was during COVID, the borders were closed. We were doing this sort of reciprocal, like if we open our borders, then they'll open their borders. And so when the borders did finally open, it was only for 2 weeks at a time. And then after this 2 weeks, they would decide if they would open for another 2 weeks. And it wasn't enough time for us to book tickets, get time off of work, book accommodations and all of that because the windows were so small. But I had just done a lot of research. I love research. I use this thing called the internet. People are always really shocked that I came to Portugal for the first time ever. I just did a lot of research. Like you said, I looked at a lot of the Facebook groups. I watched a lot of YouTube videos. So I had, I think, a strong sense of what life would be like. And we also just thought, if it doesn't work out, we'll move to another country. And, moving back to the United States was not plan B. It was probably plan like C or D. We were sort of just committed to like leaving the US permanently. And I think, we were fearful, obviously. But I feel like we made an educated guess. I wasn't going into this blindly. I had done a lot of research and had a deep understanding of, I think, what culture was like, what life was going to be like to the best of my ability without, of course, visiting and spending any sort of extended period of time. But at some point, you just have to make the decision and do it. And we were really ready. I think a lot of it was we just both mentally were really ready for something different, and we were ready for an adventure, and we wanted to do that together. And that, I think, carried us really far. And sometimes when we were doubting our decision, for him, it was earlier. For me, it was literally on the plane on the way to Portugal. This is how I process things. In the moment, I'm crying like the entire flight over because thinking, oh my God, what are we doing? But I had to listen to Nicole a year and a half ago and what she wanted and what she had put into place. And I trusted myself. I trusted that I had made this decision early on and that I made it for the right reason. So when that doubt and fear sort of crept in, I just reminded myself that like, I've been on this path and journey for a long time. This is what we wanted. And this is the right choice for us.
Yes, you knew your why. That's why it's so important to know why you're doing this, because as you said, those doubts, fears, that is going to come up, people. None of us are immune to that. I had it too. The day before my flight, when I moved almost 10 years ago from Texas to Spain, I remember those butterflies in my stomach, feeling anxious, like, what am I doing? Oh my God, what? And so that's going to come up, and that's okay. It's all part of the journey, and knowing your why can help you just remind yourself of like, yes, there's a bigger goal here. And then I'm sure once you were in Portugal, hopefully you were feeling like, yes, this was the right choice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, once we were there, everything felt like it all sort of fell into place. It's new and exciting, I think, in the first couple of months. I mean, it's still new and exciting, We just went over this past weekend on Valentine's Day and did a little staycation and explored a new part of Porto that we'd never been to before. It's still exciting. But initially, yeah, you're sort of enamored with the city, falling in love with this beautiful place and having those pinch me moments of like, we live here now. We can go out to the bridge and look at the beautiful Douro River, and we can come back tomorrow and do it again. And so those early days were definitely felt with just like a lot of magic and falling in love with this new country.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I was just in a region of Spain, or city in Spain called Cádiz, which is in the southwest corner of Spain. And it's such a charming, just little corner of Spain. And I was having those pinch me moments, and I've been here almost 10 years now. So I just love that. That really never goes away. I think there's just always like a childlike wonder that I feel living abroad. One other thing I wanted to comment on that you said that I think is really, really insightful for people, and I do say that a lot, is like where you start isn't where you have to stay. And you mentioned that, when you moved to Portugal, before you left, you just thought if this isn't the right fit, then we can just move somewhere else. Right. And I think that is such a great perspective to have when moving abroad and bringing that kind of energy to this move, because I think a lot of people feel like, I got to get it right. This has to be the right decision or else I've really messed things up. And really, that's not how it is, right? Life is all about decisions. And with new information, you make new decisions, you pivot, right? We just kind of like go on the journey. That's why I say moving abroad, it's a journey, right? I moved abroad and I was in Madrid for 5 years, and now I've been in Malaga for almost that same amount of time. And that wasn't on my plans there. So you never know. And I think just being open, to changing if need be is a great way to approach a move abroad. So going back to your visa. So the digital nomad visa was not an option at the time, but you did have the option through Portugal's non-lucrative visa, which at the time allowed people to apply if they were working. But you were working, but your company did your company have people working abroad yet? Was this something that they were used to and could tell you about?
No, not at all. I really sort of paved the way for, other people working. Some of us were working remote. So we were all working remote because of COVID. Most of us were local in the same city, but there were a few of us that were working on the East Coast. So I think we all got really familiar with working remote and doing, digital meetings and instead of going into the office. So the new way of working really worked to my advantage. Because I could sort of show in the year during COVID that everyone was working remote, that I could still do my job, do it well, exceed, advance in the company. And I really used that as leverage when I went ahead and asked, could I work remote indefinitely? And that we were interested in moving to Portugal. So I think COVID obviously opened up this whole new way of working, which I was able to, work with in pitching to my company. Was I able to move abroad, but continue in my same position?
Oh, so let's talk about that conversation, because I know for some people, it gives them a lot of anxiety to even think about approaching. Well, also, who do you approach? Are you approaching your manager, HR? Like, how did you even know what to do? And how did you bring this topic up?
So I approached my boss first, who was the VP, and she's the one who initially had sort of brought me into the current position that I was in. It is a small company. I think there are advantages to that, being in a smaller company where, I was the only person that's in my role. I think maybe sometimes in bigger companies when there's other people, you could feel like, oh, there could be some redundancy, maybe they'll let me go if I'm thinking I, might want to move abroad. So I think it was to my advantage that it was a small company. The department I worked in was small. I remember when we first started talking about this, I was like, I'm just really going to make myself so valuable that they can't say no. And I worked really hard in my position, and I continued to grow into that position and into a leadership position in my channel. So first approached the VP and, let her know in like one of our one-on-ones that, this time had really given us pause. And we were really thinking that our next chapter of life, my husband and I would be to move abroad. And really just pitched that nothing would change. The hours would stay the same. My workload would stay the same. The teams that I worked with, everything would stay the same. And so we sort of talked out any like logistical issues or concerns that she had. And then we brought it to leadership, the CEO, in a conversation with the three of us to really discuss any further questions that he had. Some of the questions were also just in a arrangement of like, how would I get paid? There is a thing of like EOR, employment of record. The companies don't want to sort of take on, they don't want to be thinking about paying taxes in another country. So we did end up using a third party EOR, which is Deal, DEEL. They're very popular. And it's actually, I was sort of an employee of Deal and paid through Deal. And that way they sort of took on any, risk or tax risk or anything like that. It was an interesting conversation. Initially, it was, we're happy for you. We're excited for you. We've never done this before. We're going to say yes, but we don't totally know how it's going to go. And it's true. It was a little bit of an experiment for everybody. There was a conversation also of, you have to be open to your role changing. It's a possibility that you could move and things could change and shift in the company. We love to think that you would continue in your same position, but we'll have to understand and see the needs of the business as that develops. And I was open to that. I said, I totally understand that. I want to be on this sort of journey and path with you. And if that's something that you deem, as the needs of the business, I'm open to that. But I'm confident that I'll be able to continue in my position the way that I'm doing it just now. And that's exactly what happened. But I do think you have to be open to that there might be some changes, or that they would possibly just bring that up to sort of make them feel good that like, yes, I'm saying yes to this now, but we have to be open to the possibility that if something changes in your role or the structure of the business, that, your position could change. And I think it's just important to be sort of malleable and adaptable at that phase and during those initial conversations.
Wow. Congratulations. So I do have a few questions, yes, about working hours, about the EOR deal, and maybe what concerns they had, when you were having those conversations. What were some of their maybe objections? I guess let's start with the objections. When you were in that conversation with your boss or with the CEO, what were they concerned about?
I think they were initially concerned about the distance, that, COVID wasn't going to be forever. And when we started going back into the office, how was that going to be with the relationship with my coworkers and the communication with, just fellow coworkers and that sort of camaraderie of like coming back into the office. We were all anticipating of like, when would that happen? And then now we see that for a lot of companies that never happened. For my company in particular, they didn't really go back to like a traditional sort of working environment. So concerns about that, even the physicality and the proximity to being with your coworkers, I think was a point of contention, a point of concern. Like I said, we didn't have anyone else who was living outside of the country at the time. Everyone was, living in the United States. I think, also just that ability to have a relationship with your coworkers, all digital, never having that sort of meeting in person, face-to-face time. And then possibly, that maybe my channel and my position, like I said, could maybe change. Maybe we'll put you in like more of a customer service position. Like that could be a possibility. So yeah, maybe just talking about different positions, different areas that you could move into. Those were sort of the main concerns. But again, I was really confident that I would be able to continue working with my teams, do all the deliverables. Once it was sort of approved and I did really start thinking about the hours, there is an 8-hour time difference, which is pretty significant. And if I had worked my regular West Coast hours, I'd be working, until like 1 a.m. We did have some people working on the East Coast and, East Coast, West Coast hours, not that big of a deal. So I did request that could I work East Coast hours? And they did say, yes, that would be fine. And really that was a big game changer for me. So I worked 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. So I'm still working into the evenings, but still at a reasonable time. And I think that made a really big difference for me. The 1 a.m. would have been, I really would have been a night owl. And not being able just to do some like regular things that you do in your life in Portugal. So I did ask for that. But since we had people already working on the East Coast, they were amenable to that.
Fabulous. Okay, great. I was going to ask about the hours because that is a big time difference with the West Coast, and that will change your lifestyle abroad if you do have to be working past midnight, Monday through Friday. So that's great that you got the East Coast hours. In terms of your employee status, were you a W-2 that had to change to 1099? Talk about that because I'm sure our listeners are interested in what you had to do with your company, and I guess what were the requirements for the visa that you got at the time?
Yes. So yes, I did change. I went from a full-time employee to a contractor, 1099. I did negotiate that I would have all the regular and same perks that I had as a full-time employee. So that still included, what the company offered, which was like unlimited PTO, vacation pay, paying for part of my health insurance, all of those things, instead of asking for a pay increase, which a lot of contractors do because you don't get those things. I said, I will keep my salary the same. I won't ask for anything additional, but I'd still like to have all the perks that I normally had as a full-time employee. And they were agreeable to that. So yes, but the category of which I worked did change.
Wonderful. Great. Okay. More questions here because, when you take a job abroad, and I want to talk about deal and EOR, if you're a W-2 employee and your company says, oh, sure, you could take it abroad. Legally, if you're just like going to go move to another country, your company is going to be breaking some laws there. That's why a lot of people have to change their status from a W-2 to a 1099, because if you're a W-2 employee and your company does not have an entity in the country you want to move to, they will not be compliant mainly with local tax laws and labor laws. That's why companies may be resistant. But when you're a 1099, your company isn't liable for you. They're not on the hook for the labor laws and the taxes, but you still got to figure out the visa situation, right? You still have to be legal to live in a country. And so you had Deal come in. Deal was kind of the middleman, right? Who was helping make you compliant abroad and set all this up for you and your company. How did you know what to do? Did you do research? Did Deal come in and talk to you and your company to explain what needs to be done to make sure everything was compliant and all the boxes were ticked?
So my sister works in HR for her company. And so she did, give me a little bit of advice. She was familiar with Deal, with someone that they had worked with previously. I did have that initial conversation with Deal on my own behalf so I could understand what the implications were and what that meant. And then when I was talking to the company and sort of pitching this idea to them, I did tell them that I had done some research with Deal and introduced them to my connection there. And so I did a lot of the legwork myself so that they didn't have to. I think it's really complicated when you're asking these big asks to change your total work environment, your whole situation, and then put it on your company to do all of the research. We also were a small company, and so we didn't have an HR person at the time. So there also wasn't somebody on staff who is dedicated to handling those types of issues. So I really presented a sort of full package for them and made it easy for them to say yes.
Love that. Yes. For anyone who's interested in going this route, yeah, Deal is a great company. Remote's another one. And I'll say Native Teams, they're a partner of us at She Hit Refresh. So I'll drop the link in the show notes. Okay, we've talked a lot about the work part. I guess just any last bits of advice for anyone who wants to negotiate remote work from another country with their employer. What would be like your top 3 tips?
I think anticipate anything that they might think as a barrier. So whether that's hours, whether that's managing your team, managing your workload, expectation, hours, just come prepared. Think of all the things that why they would say no and already have a solution to the problem. Like be very solution oriented when you're coming to have these discussions. I also think, there are a hierarchy of things. So maybe you are coming to your manager sort of in confidence initially to gauge and sort of test the waters, see what their reactions are. I think a manager can be really instrumental in sort of packaging it together once you bring it to leadership. So definitely what are those chain of commands and how to have those conversations and when. Also, give them a timeline. I think, it was a long timeline between us having the initial conversation and when we actually move. So there's also should be a timeline for when you're actually going to move. They also signed some paperwork. There was like a letter, basically like a letter of endorsement and recommendation that I submitted with my application that was saying that, yes, I was changing to 1099, but that my job responsibilities and my salary was not going to change. So in addition to your company just saying, okay, yes, they also will have to write like an endorsement letter. And so that I actually sort of drafted, sent it over to be notarized, paid for the notary to come and get signed. So you are going to have to do a lot of this like extra legwork, but know that, this is for your benefit, but just be prepared that this is a process and you are going to have to sort of package all of this up and present it. So think of it as your ultimate presentation at your job, something that you have one chance to do and you want to do it really well.
Love that. Yes. Come prepared. Plead your case, but come with, information. And like you said, just kind of anticipate what could come up in these conversations, what their blockers and objections will be, and have some answers there for them based on the research that you've done. Okay, let's talk about now Portugal, because you overcame the roadblock of the work piece. Like now you're able to take your job abroad. The visa's getting sorted out. You made it to Portugal. What were those first few months like? Because again, you moved to this country sight unseen. How did the reality meet the expectation?
I think there wasn't too many things that I was surprised about. Like I said, in those early days, we were just like falling in love with the city and the country. We didn't start speaking Portuguese or taking our Portuguese lessons until like 6 months in. And I know that can sort of seem like a long time, but I feel like, you're just sort of getting your bearings. You're learning what the day to day is. You're just sort of trying to understand how to navigate this new world. I remember a piece of advice from one of the Facebook groups, which was do one thing each day, just one thing. And I thought, gosh, that seems so simple. But when you're in a brand new place with a brand new language and everything feels different, one thing like grocery shopping or going to the post office or doing something related to your immigration can take a long time, first of all, and just can, seem really daunting and sort of overwhelming. So if you can tackle just one small task for the day, that feels really good and gives you the confidence to sort of continue on. And I honestly still feel that way. Sometimes there are days when I get to do one thing that I felt great about. And that's enough for me, and this is 3 years in. So yeah, initially we were just sort of settling in. We brought 2 cats and a dog, getting everybody else acclimated to a brand new place as well. I took about 2 weeks off of work just for like the big move. And then, just sort of got back into the swing of things, adjusted to my new work hours, a new working from home situation. Yeah, it was lovely.
Love it. And let's talk about kind of one of the biggest concerns people have is housing. So how did you find housing when you hit the ground? Did you do short term and then long term? Or I guess tell us about the process.
So part of the visa requirements is that you have to show a 1-year lease. So we had to do that at our appointment in the United States. So we ended up paying for 5 months rent even before we landed in Portugal. So know that that's also part of the expense of moving abroad. The relocation company that I used referred me to a real estate agent. who was, in Porto, and I worked with him, and we only looked at 2 properties. I actually found the apartment that we ended up renting on a Facebook group. He went on our behalf and did like a video call, with the other real estate agent, showed us the neighborhood, the area. We were really happy with it, and then moved forward with all the documentation that was signed and sort of, how did that come over? DHL'd to us to sign and then go back and forth. So that we had to have at the visa appointment to show that we had already secured a place to live. And so the apartment had been there in our name for 5 months, like I said, before we even stepped foot. And it was really surreal coming into the apartment for the first time and being like, oh, this is our place. Much smaller than we thought it would be. As much European housing is, a big surprise. We were like, oh, it's cozy. Okay. But it felt so great just to like be in our place for the first time.
Lovely. Yes, people, if you're coming from the US, definitely be ready to downsize, especially if you want to live in a city. If you want to live in the campo, like out in the countryside, you can get a big house. But in the city, we're living in smaller quarters here. Are you still in the same housing that you had when you arrived, or have you changed apartments?
No, we've changed apartments. So we were there for 2 years. And then we recently moved into another place, and we've been in there for about a year.
Great. And how did you find your second place?
The same real estate agent. Love your real estate agents, people. They're really so useful. And our specific real estate agent would help us like bring a plumber out, or when like some of the sliding door got stuck or whatever, would call all of the places. And so he was really helpful just throughout. And one of the first person that we literally ever met when we moved to Portugal was our real estate agent. And he was just so lovely and has been just so helpful in this whole process of just like navigating the country.
Fabulous. And one thing, I do want to point out that you mentioned is that you needed to have housing or a lease for a certain amount of time as part of your visa application. Just so for anyone listening out there, for many visas, whether that's like a non-lucrative that Nicole went, that pathway, or a digital nomad visa or other visas, often depending on the country and also the consulate, because every consulate works a little bit different in the US. There will probably be a requirement for housing to show that you have anywhere from 3 months of housing to sometimes up to a year. So definitely look into that when you're looking into visas for different countries. Check your specific consulate for where you live, the one that is assigned to you, because again, different consulates may have different requirements when it comes to something like this. All right, let's talk about cultural differences. Actually, no, I want to ask first about Portuguese language, because you mentioned, you started taking classes about 6 months in, but how important is it to speak Portuguese in terms of getting by? I mean, we always encourage people to learn the local language. That's how you can really integrate with the culture. But in terms of just getting by in the beginning, do you need Portuguese? Is it essential, or can you get by with English for a bit?
You definitely can get by, especially in the bigger cities. Definitely in Porto, definitely in Lisbon. Interestingly enough, we went to Lisbon and we were speaking Portuguese, and we were actually asked not to speak Portuguese. Could we speak English? Which I thought was so wild and really interesting. It's such an international city. But yeah, you can definitely get by. Like I said, we didn't really start studying the language until like 6 months in. You can get by with the day-to-day, going to cafes. When in doubt, just point at something in the pastry case that you want and that'll work. So yeah, you can definitely get by. There's a lot of English speakers. I think Portuguese are really humble about their English. So if you ask them, do you speak English? They'll say a little, and then you'll have a full-on fluent conversation with them. So yeah, I think you can definitely get by. But yes, it was really important for us to learn the language, in a real way, and really just, build a community. And I think it's lovely when people stop me on the street and ask me for directions first. I think it's great because they think I speak Portuguese. Which I'm learning, but it's just those little micro interactions that I feel like make you really feel like you're a part here and you're just not like a tourist passing through. And those are the things that are really important to me to build a life, is to learn the language.
Definitely, especially if you're going to be somewhere long term. But I think it's really also important to have a realistic perspective of, what becoming fluent in learning a language is. I see people saying, I think I'll be, I'm going to move to Spain. I'll be fluent in a year or two. I'm like, whoa, okay, that's very ambitious. Not a lot of people are reaching that unless if you are very, very good at languages, but it does take years to really get to a fluency level. So even if you speak zero of a language and you move there, it's going to take you a while to even get up to a very like low level conversational level. It can take years. So I think just like good for people to just be easy and gentle with themselves in terms of learning a language. It takes a lot of not only time, but a lot of initiative also.
Yeah, I think it's so much ego. I thought the hardest part of learning a language would be, conjugating verbs or, everyone says the pronunciation is so difficult. I think the biggest part that gets in the way is myself and my ego and my self-esteem and just you having to constantly put yourself out there, constantly being confused, constantly sometimes nodding and playing along until you get one word of the conversation and you're like, okay, I'm back in it. I'm back, I'm back, I'm focused. Okay, I know what we're talking about. But so much of it is yourself. I feel like I've grown and changed a lot by learning another language as an adult. It's really challenging, but it's also really rewarding.
Yeah, that's so true because as adults, I mean, we have we have conquered a lot of things. We know how to do a lot of things. We have confidence in most areas of our lives. But when you are a beginner language learner, beginner intermediate, like you're just bad at it. And like to be bad at something on a daily basis with a basic need is communication, it really is hard to consistently put yourself out there. Like you said, not be understood to like, I'm doing air quotes here for those that are listening, just to feel dumb, right? You're just trying to communicate. It does take a lot of courage to constantly put yourself out there, but that's the only way that you get better, right? Is by making those mistakes and going through that very uncomfortable, awkward phase of language learning. All right. So now let's talk about some of the cultural differences. What have been some of the biggest cultural differences that you've had to adjust to from the US to Portugal?
Well, I think one of the things I was really looking forward to is that sort of European slow way of life that everybody talks about, that everybody thinks that they want. And I wanted it too. I just didn't know what that meant. I was just like, okay, well, I guess I'll see it when I get there. And sometimes it's really lovely where, you'll be having a cafe or a lunch for several hours at a time because no one's rushing you out of the restaurant because they're not concerned about turning that table over and getting somebody in there. I mean, me and my girlfriends routinely have, 2-3 hour lunches, also because the service is a little more leisurely as well. But then there's also things that just take a long time, and then you have to be patient about. I think one of the biggest like culture shocks or something I'm still getting used to is sort of this bureaucracy that they talk about in Portugal. The processes for big things just take a long time. Like I'm having a complicated tax situation that's sort of just been on pause for months and months. The immigration system here is overwhelmed and there's not enough sort of administrative support. So for the past 6 months, my residency card has been expired and you're not really technically supposed to leave the country or travel outside of the country during this time. So I think that leisurely, slow pace can sound really great, but coming from the United States where things are pretty efficient, and even if things are sort of backlogged, you at least know your place in line or there's an estimated date of approval or response by. That doesn't necessarily happen in Portugal. And that can lead you just to a lot of confusion and frustration. And it's a very different way of life. And there's a sense of like loss of control, and that can be really scary, especially when you're talking about important things like taxes or, your ability to be, legal, like in a country.
Definitely. And yeah, echoing all that in Spain, bureaucracy is just part of the game here. So definitely something that everyone's going to experience. So buckle up, people, if you're moving. I think if you're moving abroad anywhere that you're going to be an immigrant, there's always a lot of paperwork involved. And that never ends. It's not like you apply for your visa and you move abroad and it's great. Then you got to get the permanent residency. Then you got to get the renewal, and there's always something going on. So I feel you on that. You mentioned having lunch with your girlfriends. So let's talk about friendships and building community. How easy or difficult has that been since moving to Porto?
Well, I think like a lot of people, I thought I would have like a bunch of Portuguese friends and really integrate into the community. And I think that's been slower than I sort of anticipated and thought. And I think that's fine, but I think it will come in time. I think there is a language barrier, and a lot of that can be attributed to that. Sometimes you just don't run sort of in the same circles. There's a lot of Facebook groups for like expat meetups and Girls Gone International. So I feel like there's a lot of opportunities to meet other people who have moved abroad, which has been really lovely. Something I think I also didn't expect. I didn't expect to have friends from all over the world. That has been such a really cool, positive thing that was never on my radar when I thought I was moving to Portugal. And so routinely we're talking about like, oh, where did you go last weekend? I have a friend going to Malta. I have a friend going back to Brazil. And so by proxy, I'm getting to learn so much about the world and all these really, different and cool places. And I think that's really special and something unique and something I didn't think about or plan for. But I think the way that I started building my own community here is by my hobbies. I love to read. I love to be part of like book clubs. So I joined a book club. I was following a book club on Instagram before I moved. And it was one of the groups that I wanted to join when I moved to Porto. And I got to meet a lot of people. I'm still in some book clubs. I'm organizing my own book swaps. English language books are not nearly as plentiful as they are back home. And so what do we do with all the books that we've gotten? I want to facilitate and just sort of create a space to like share those things and also just like meet other like-minded gals. And so I've created this book loving community. And that's something that is really special to me. And I've made a lot of really great friendships from that.
Love that. And yes, very true what you said about it can be challenging to make local friends, right? Especially, this podcast is for women in their 30s, 40s and above. So we're not necessarily moving abroad with the school program. And most of us aren't, being transferred with our company where you already have built-in community. And so that I've had that here in Spain too. Like most of my friends are foreigners because it is more challenging to make friends with locals because locals already have their communities and their friends. They're not like trying to find a straggler American to bring into their group of people they've known since middle school, high school, or whatever friends they already have. So I know some people I see in some of the expat groups, or I've heard people say, when I move abroad, I don't want to have any American friends. I just want like local friends. And that is great. And I totally get that. But I do think it's important to understand that it can be challenging to make those local friendships, especially if you don't speak the language. You're going to have to get your language skills up to a certain level to really have meaningful relationships with locals. But I'm glad that, that you mentioned delving into your hobbies. I think that's such a great way to meet locals and just, people from around the world too that have similar interests.
I will also say that my dog, surprisingly, has been the thing that introduced us to the locals that we did get to know and become friends with. And never did I expect that our little Sheltie would sort of be the one to like bridge the gap. But, we would be out walking him or, taking him to the dog park. And, you're just sort of chit chatting and striking up conversation. He's a Sheltie, which you also really don't see in Portugal at all. They are very familiar with collies, the big cousin, they watch Lassie. They think he's a baby Lassie. And so they love sort of chatting with us about him. And it was some of the very first things we learned to say in Portuguese, that what our dog's name was, that he was a Sheltie and that he was 4 years old and he barks, but he doesn't bite. And so he was really the entry point to a lot of just like chit chat conversations. And we met some really good friends at the dog park that we're still friends with now. And those friendships have blossomed, and we were able to go with our friend Joao's family to Vindimo. His family has like a plot of land that they grow grapes and stuff. And we got to go out there and sort of pick the grapes and stomp the grapes and make the wine and just these really traditional, really cool Portuguese experiences. So I think it's definitely worth making friends. Obviously, with locals, you get a deep understanding of the actual culture when you have that opportunity. But sometimes it's the things that you never would have expected. So if you are moving over with a pet, those are great opportunities to meet people.
Your entry into local life. I love it. Through our fur babies. So we are getting close to the end here, but I know that you are very passionate about helping others who want to move to Portugal and helping them through that before, during, and after their move. Just reflecting on your own move now that it's been 3 years out, is there anything that you would have done differently to prepare for your move?
I mean, honestly, I don't think so. I think I did as much research as I could have. I think what I'm trying to provide with my Instagram is something that I couldn't find at the time, which was, foreigners sharing their experiences about living in Portugal. In Lisbon, I saw a lot of that. In Porto, not so much. And I would have loved to maybe chat with or, pick the brain of or follow the Instagram of someone who was living that life. And so I thought when I moved there, that was something that I was going to do. Like I was going to start this Instagram account, Nicole in Portugal, and I was going to share what a daily life of an American living in another country really was like. I sort of just like built up this following. There's a lot of people that are curious about what a life could look like here. How do they do it? How do they move? What are the experiences like? And so I think I just like saw a gap in information that I wish I had had because I wasn't able to come and visit first. And so that's something that I have sort of built and created this really amazing community and following for. And I'm really proud of that.
Yes, people follow Nicole at Nicole in Portugal. It is also just a beautiful account. I just love your videos and photographs as well. In terms of Porto, then, do you see yourself staying there long term, or do you have plans to maybe try somewhere else in the world?
I think for right now, we're really happy with Portugal. At 5 years, we'll apply for citizenship. We'll have that Schengen visa. We'll have the opportunity to live in other countries. That's also that world that opens up for you once you have that citizenship. But for right now, we've invested so much, in learning the language. The thought of like learning another language, just like they're the things that nightmares are made of. So like definitely not thinking about that. We're really happy in Portugal. Yeah.
Love to hear that. And let's see, any final words you have of encouragement for anyone who's listening, our audience of women over 30 who want to do this, but maybe they feel stuck where they're at in life. Maybe they feel scared to make this leap. Maybe it just sounds too crazy. What words of encouragement would you give them?
I think like trust your instincts. If it's something that you really are interested in and it's a part of the life that you want to lead, I think that we're told this story of like, wait until you're retired to do all the things that you want to do. And I was 41 when we moved, and there was no way that I was waiting another 25 years to like live the life that I wanted. I wanted to be able-bodied, exploring places. I wanted to still have an open mind and not be too comfortable. I would still encourage you to do it. I think if it's something that you really want and you're committed to it, even try it out. The first destination doesn't have to be the last destination, like you said. I still think it's a life worth making and a life worth living. Yeah, just do it. I think you'll be really happy. And there's nothing that makes you feel more proud than moving abroad. I will say that. I feel like I have a PhD in moving to Portugal, and you feel like if you can do that, you can literally do anything. I am currently, having one-on-one consultations and conversations with gals who are interested in moving. There's only so much that I can share on my Instagram. And even though it is chock full of information, people have really specific questions like I did too when I moved. And so if that's something you're interested in to see what life really is like, to ask me all the sort of personal questions, I'm happy to provide that service. I would have loved to pick the brain of somebody who was living there just to get a little bit of deeper understanding of, were all of my assumptions or things that I had read and learned about, were those actually true? So that is a service that I'm offering to people.
Awesome. And where can people connect with you and find you if they want to? We know if to follow you on Instagram, Nicole in Portugal, but where can they connect with you if they want to work with you?
Yeah, they can follow me on Instagram and send me a DM. They could also send me an email at nicoleinportugal@gmail.com.
Fabulous. Well, Nicole, thank you so much. I'm so excited that we got to share your story and also really touch on that big win that you had of being able to get your employer to say yes about taking your job abroad. So congrats on that. Congrats on this wonderful life that you have created for yourself in Porto. And thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this episode and leave feeling like a move abroad is even more possible for you. If you're happy with what you saw, I want to invite you to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and leave a question or comment because I would love to hear from you. If you're ready to take action on your dream to move abroad, be sure to grab my Visa Guide to Europe. It's your roadmap to over 50 viable visa options in 19 countries. You can grab the link below in the show notes. And don't forget to get on the wait list for my next Move Abroad After 30 Masterclass, a masterclass for women age 30 and up, which is a step-by-step training to help you fast track your move abroad. And grab the link in the show notes as well. And last but not least, a huge shout out to our sponsor, International Living. Thank you so much for making this season possible. Until next time, ciao for now.